Well, good morning, everyone. Our script reading today is from the book of Ecclesiastes. So we're going to the Old Testament. It's a book that's right after Proverbs and right before Song of Solomon, if you're looking for it. So we're going to read the first three chapters of the book. So chapter 1, verses 1 to 3. Ecclesiastes 1, verses 1 to 3. The words of the teacher, son of David, king of Jerusalem. Meaningless, meaningless, says the teacher. Utterly meaningless. Everything is meaningless. What do people gain from all their labors at which they toil under the sun? So what is the meaning of life? It's a big question. I went on Google, of course. We all have Google, right? And looked up some quotes just to see what people thought of this. So Arnold Schwarzenegger has some wise words about this. He says the meaning of life is not simply to exist, to survive, but to move ahead, to go up, to achieve, to conquer. So achievement seems to be his answer. Sounds a lot like Conan there, but he wants to achieve, he wants to conquer, and you can actually see that in his life. He's done a lot with his life, and he's achieved a lot of kind of big things with respect to his movies and political aspirations and all that kind of stuff. Whoopi Goldberg. She says, we're here for a reason. I believe a bit of the reason is to throw little torches out to lead people through the dark. So hers seems to be helping others. So again, very noble. She wants to help people out, throw little torches out to try to lead people somewhere, but to help people out in some way or some fashion or another. Jim Henson. If you don't know who Jim Henson is, he's the guy behind all the Muppets and Sesame Street and all that kind of stuff, all the little puppets that talk and are really cute. His quote with respect to the meaning of life is, life is meant to be fun and joyous and fulfilling. May each of yours be that. So again, his is to have fun, to be fulfilled, to have a life that's enjoyable, having a good time. You shouldn't be, angry or unhappy or sad all the time. He wants people to have fun and be joyous. I remember watching a movie. I never actually read the book. It's kind of on my list. Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Science fiction book that's utter nonsense, I guess. At the end of the movie, they have the answer to the meaning of life is 42. Again, makes no sense, but that's what the whole book's about. But they derived it to a mathematical equation. The answer is 42 is the meaning of life. But many go through life in search for meaning. You're kind of going through, you're trying to figure out what to do with your life. Some people don't search for anything. They just kind of go through their cycles. You go to work, you go to sleep, you get up, you maybe have some hobbies here and there. But there's a lot of people that search for the meaning of life. And we're going to go to the Old Testament to provide some insight on this question. We are in the book of Ecclesiastes. We're going to go back there, but let's look at a New Testament verse in Romans 15. We're going to look at Romans 15 and verse 4. We primarily look at the New Testament. That's the New Covenant. That's what gives us a lot of instruction. And in Romans 15 and verse 4, it gives us some insight on how it is wise, and there's a lot of good information in the Old Testament as well. So Romans 15 and verse 4 says, for everything that was written in the past was written to teach us, so that through the endurance taught in the Scriptures and the encouragement they provide, we might have hope. In the context of this passage, when it says the Scriptures, it's referring to the Old Testament word, the Old Testament that's presented here. So everything that's written in the past, all these things that are written in the Old Testament are there to teach us. They're there to give us wisdom, to give us insight. In this passage, it refers to giving us endurance and encouragement and hope. We can see the stories in the Old Testament about some of the things that they went through trying to stay true to God. And we try to apply those and see their examples and apply those in our lives so that we can draw from that when times are tough for us and we have things that we have to go through. So the Old Testament is a tremendous source of wisdom that we can draw from. So we're going to go to Ecclesiastes. If you want to go back there, we're going to spend most of our time there. And the Ecclesiastes is an interesting book with respect to this. Many people think it's a very puzzling book. It's got a lot of strange things that are taught in it, at least on the surface. The word meaningless is used a lot, or vanity, depending on the version that you're looking at. So some people think it's a very melancholy book, something that kind of brings you down almost when you start reading it. But it's not a book that we should ignore. We should really be paying attention to what it says and really try to understand what it says. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with this lesson as a series, looking at the book of Ecclesiastes and looking at some of the wisdom that's presented in the book of Ecclesiastes. So it's something that we can really draw from to gain wisdom, especially in our materialistic society. There's a lot of talk in this book about materialism and looking for profit and looking for those things that many people do see as the drive of the meaning of life. You know, maybe Arnold Schwarzenegger is one of those guys, really searching for money, searching for achievement, searching for success. And it is of special value because its message is and appears to be directed to the young people. I think when I say young, it could apply to those young at heart as well. You know, we can all draw lessons from the book of Ecclesiastes because it is there to teach us. It's there to transfer wisdom from somebody who is wise to people who can learn from that. People can apply that in their lives. So this lesson today is primarily an introduction to Ecclesiastes. You know, who wrote it? When was it written? What are the general messages that are presented in Ecclesiastes? In the Hebrew Bible, this book is called Koheleth. So again, it's a different language, so maybe hard to understand. I'll spell it for those who want to write it down. It actually starts with a Q. So Qoheleth. So Koheleth. At least that's what I'm guessing as the way it's pronounced. And what it means is the words of the preacher. So if you go to Ecclesiastes 1 and verse 1, that's what it starts with. It says, the words of the teacher, son of David, king in Jerusalem. Again, depending on the version that you have, it might say the words of the preacher as well. The term suggests one who speaks to an assembly or a preacher, somebody who's talking to a group of people. Translators of the Septuagint version called it Ecclesiastes. As I see in the notes when I researched this, that's actually Ecclesiastes with 2 Ks, not 2 Cs, as we have it in our English Bible. And that's derived from the word ecclesia, which means the called out or the assembly. So again, it's words from a preacher talking to an assembly, talking to a group. Ecclesiastes, ecclesia. Somebody giving a message to a group of people, a group of Christians. If we look at the authorship, it's not explicitly stated in the book who wrote this book, but there's some very good clues as to who wrote it. Jewish and early Christian tradition attribute the book to Solomon, so the son of David, king of Israel at the time. And in Ecclesiastes 1 and verse 1, it actually says that. It says, the words of the teacher, son of David, king in Jerusalem. So again, that narrows it down quite a bit to Solomon and his siblings, I guess. It could be any of those. But that is the most common understanding of who wrote this book, is Solomon. We can see some other clues in the book of Ecclesiastes. If you go to Ecclesiastes 1 and verse 16, there's some internal references that point to Solomon as being the one who wrote this book. Ecclesiastes 1 and verse 16 says, I said to myself, look, I have increased in wisdom more than anyone who has ruled over Jerusalem before me. I have experienced much of wisdom and knowledge. So he's referring to his wisdom. I have wisdom greater than any other person who's ruled Jerusalem before me. Again, if you put your bookmark in Ecclesiastes, we're certainly coming back there. But if you go to 1 Kings 3, we'll look at verses 11 to 12. So 1 Kings 3, verses 11 to 12. It's kind of an interesting situation. God essentially granted Solomon a wish, in a sense. He's saying, tell me what you want. And this was Solomon's response. Solomon came back and he said what he wanted. So if we look at 1 Kings 3, verses 11 to 12. It says, so God said to him, so that's God who said to Solomon, since you have asked for this, and not for long life or wealth for yourself, nor have you asked for the death of your enemies, but for discernment in administering justice, I will do what you have asked. I will give you a wise and discerning heart, so that there will never have been anyone like you, nor will there ever be. So God granted Solomon wisdom like no one else. He said, what would you like? And Solomon says, I want wisdom. I want wisdom in administering justice. I want to rule the kingdom of Israel the best that it can be ruled. And God was impressed. And actually, because of that, God gave him all those other things. He gave him wealth and all of those other materialistic things. But it's one of those things where God granted him wisdom. And in Ecclesiastes, we see how the writer of Ecclesiastes says that I've increased in wisdom beyond anybody else. And that, again, points to Solomon as being the author of this book. We go to Ecclesiastes 2, and we'll look at verses 4 to 6. There's another clue that points to Solomon being the author. This refers to his building activities, the structures that he built. Ecclesiastes 2, verses 4 to 6. It says, I undertook great projects. I built houses for myself and planted vineyards. I made gardens and parks and planted all kinds of fruit trees in them. I made reservoirs to water groves of flourishing trees. If you look in the Old Testament, there are records of Solomon's achievements in buildings and structures and how he built out the kingdom of Israel. So again, another clue that points to him being the author. If we keep reading in verses 7 to 9 of Ecclesiastes 2, it refers to his wealth, his materialistic wealth that he had. So Ecclesiastes 2, verses 7 to 9. It says, I bought male and female slaves and had other slaves who were born in my house. I also owned more herds and flocks than anyone in Jerusalem before me. I amassed silver and gold for myself and the treasure of kings and provinces. I acquired male and female singers and a harem as well, the delights of a man's heart. I became greater by far than anyone in Jerusalem before me. In all this, my wisdom stayed with me. So again, he has these materialistic things. And again, this points to Solomon. If we go to 2 Chronicles, again, we're coming back to Ecclesiastes, so keep a bookmark there. This is an account of how the Queen of Sheba came to visit Solomon, and this is what she saw. And again, this relates back to how the clues in Ecclesiastes point to Solomon being the author. So 2 Chronicles 9, we'll look at verses 1 to 4. So 2 Chronicles 9, verses 1 to 4. When the Queen of Sheba heard of Solomon's fame, she came to Jerusalem to test him with hard questions. Arriving with a very great caravan with camels carrying spices, large quantities of gold, and precious stones, she came to Solomon and talked with him about all she had on her mind. Solomon answered all her questions. Nothing was too hard for him to explain to her. When the Queen of Sheba saw the wisdom of Solomon, as well as the palace he had built, the food on his table, the seating of his officials, the attending servants in their robes, the cupbearers in their robes, and the burnt offerings he made at the temple of the Lord, she was overwhelmed. So she was overwhelmed by his wisdom and also overwhelmed by, again, that materialistic stuff, his temple, all the pieces and the riches that he had around him. So again, these things about what was written in Ecclesiastes about the author, about how he had wisdom, he built many things, he had a lot of wealth, point back again being the son of David, king of Jerusalem, as being author of Ecclesiastes being Solomon. And I like in Ecclesiastes 1 and 2 where he's essentially putting out kind of a resume in a sense, saying, I'm qualified to say all these things. I have godly wisdom, I have experience, I have life experience. I'm worthy of writing about these things, of imparting wisdom to the youth. He's kind of giving him his resume in a sense in that way. He'd experienced all the things that many people would consider success. Again, materialistic. He was a king. He had all of that wealth, fame. He had wisdom. And he gives his inspired thoughts on these matters in Ecclesiastes. So this is how we can gain that wisdom through the writings of Solomon that are presented in Ecclesiastes. If we look at the date, and we assume that Solomon is the author, that would put the date of the book around 945 BC, so 945 before the birth of Christ, so minus 945 if you were to think of the way we take dates today, 2022 minus 945. So that's about the date of the author, and some of the messages that are presented in Ecclesiastes. We're going to look at a couple, and a few different ways that these things are presented to us. If you go to Ecclesiastes 1, we'll look at verses 2 and verse 14. And this deals with that idea of the futility of life. And again, this is one of the reasons why people think it's kind of a depressing book at times, where he's talking about things being meaningless and the vanity of things. But one message is the futility of life under the sun. And that's kind of a bit of a clarification on the things when he says meaningless or vanity. Ecclesiastes 1, we'll look at verses 2 and then verse 14. So verse 2, he says, meaningless, meaningless, says the teacher, utterly meaningless. Everything is meaningless. That doesn't sound very encouraging, but we'll move on. Go to verse 14. I have seen all the things that are done under the sun. All of them are meaningless, a chasing after the wind. So a key word in the book of Ecclesiastes is this word meaningless or vanity. Again, depending on the translation that you have. Verse 2 might read vanity, vanity, says the preacher. That's some of the words that are used interchangeably depending on the version that you have. So that word vanity or meaningless occurs about 35 times in 29 verses. So it's repeated a lot through the book. What it means is futility, uselessness, nothingness. So it's kind of that, again, meaningless word. And it may be, again, why this book is considered depressing to some people. But the context of what is meaningless is very important. The other key phrase that's used in this book a lot is under the sun. So in verse 14, it says, I've seen all the things that are done under the sun. All of them are meaningless. So again, all of them are vanity, chasing after the wind. Under the sun occurs about 29 times in 27 verses. So it's repeated a lot through the book as well. And this phrase suggests from an earthly point of view. So that's where it's being, that word meaningless or vanity is kind of has a framework of being from an earthly point of view. So he's not saying everything is meaningless, as in everything you could possibly potentially do or focus on is meaningless, but everything from an earthly point of view is meaningless. So he's kind of framing that context of meaningless to that. So this framework of what meaningless is under the sun, or from an earthly point of view, or without God as your guiding force. That's where he's saying that things are meaningless, as if that's where you're putting all of your eggs in that basket in a sense. So this book illustrates the vanity or meaningless of life when looked at from solely an earthly perspective. So without God in your life, without God as being a part of your life and essentially the driving force of your life. So as we go through this series, we're going to expand on that quite a bit. We have several lessons to go through. So again, we're going to get into a bit of the details and dive a little bit more into that subject. But that's one of the general messages that's presented in the book of Ecclesiastes, is that idea of futility of life without God. Futility of life when you're focusing on things that are just from an earthly perspective. Another primary message is the importance of serving God through life. So again, he talks about the vanity of life or the meaninglessness of life without God, and then he stresses the importance of serving God. So again, the flip side of that, or what you should be doing instead. We go to Ecclesiastes 11. And look at a couple of passages from this area. We're going to read verses 9 up into chapter 12 and verse 1. So we're going to start in Ecclesiastes chapter 11 and verse 9. So Ecclesiastes 11, starting in verse 9. You who are young, be happy while you are young, and let your heart give you joy in the days of your youth. Follow the ways of your heart and whatever your eyes see. But know that for all these things God will bring you into judgment. So then banish anxiety from your heart and cast off the troubles of your body, for youth and vigor are meaningless. Remember your Creator in the days of your youth, before the days of trouble came and the years approach when you will say, I find no pleasure in them. And if we jump ahead down to chapter 12, verses 13 and 14. So chapter 12, verses 13 and 14. Now all has been heard. Here is the conclusion of the matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the duty of all mankind. For God will bring every deed into judgment, including every hidden thing, whether it's good or evil. So this passage stresses the importance of serving God. And before you think too much into that, I guess, if you think about serving God, again, that's a huge question, what that actually means. But when we do this, when we serve God, when we put him as the focus in our life, and again, we take our focus from what is under the sun, from an earthly perspective, those things are deemed as meaningless in the book of Ecclesiastes, and we put that focus on God. It doesn't mean you're not going to achieve things or have blessings in this world. You are going to have positive things. But your focus does change. And that's what's really being stressed here. The meaning of life is not experiencing the things of this world. The meaning of life is found in serving the Creator of this world. And when you do that, you are going to gain other blessings. You're going to have blessings that are here on this earth, and you're going to have that ultimate blessing of being with him for eternity. But you're focusing on something that is eternal now. You're not focusing on things that are of the earth or just simply in the perspective of this physical surrounding around us. It goes beyond that. What's around us is going to pass away. We are going to pass away. And what really matters is what lasts for eternity after that. And that's what's really being focused on here. Serve God, keep his commands. Make sure that is the primary focus of your life. You're going to have many blessings while on this earth, and you're going to have that ultimate blessing when you pass away from this earth as well. If you go to Ecclesiastes 12 and verse 11. I kind of like this passage. It's again, very interesting to think of with respect to the book of Ecclesiastes and somebody giving you advice, in a sense. This book contains, I'm going to use a couple of different words here that you may not be familiar with, or at least one, is goads and nails. You're probably familiar with what a nail is, but maybe not a goad. But let's look at Ecclesiastes 12 and verse 11. The words of the wise are like goads, their collected sayings like firmly embedded nails, given by one shepherd. So I'm saying goad, not goat. It's goad. And I looked it up just to make sure I understood what it was. I kind of had the idea in my mind of something sharp and pointy. But what it is, it's a spiked stick used for driving cattle. I'm not sure many people have driven cattle in this room. But it's one of those things, back in those days, the context would be very applicable. People who have totally understood what he's talking about, because lots of people drove cattle during those times. But it's a sharp, pointy stick. You want the cows to go this way or that way, you poke them with a stick and they go that way. So that's what a goad is. You're goading somebody along. That's where that phrase came from. And these words of the wise are designed to goad or prod our thinking. They're there to kind of poke us along in the right direction. It's there to make us think, make us there to kind of evaluate what's going on in our life and evaluate what's being said and say, hey, maybe I need to change. Maybe I need to go this other way. That's what these sayings are intended to do to us. And then if you look at the word nail, their collected sayings are like firmly embedded nails given by one shepherd. The words of the preacher are there to nail or anchor our lives as well. If you think of something being nailed down, it's not going to move. If I try to move this thing around, it moves pretty easily. So it's not nailed down. If it was, I wouldn't be able to move it around. When we put these things, this wisdom that's presented in the book of Ecclesiastes to practice in our life, it's going to anchor us down. We're not going to be able to be kind of flopped around by different teachings and different ways of life. We're going to be taught by the creator of the world through the inspired writings of the book of Ecclesiastes, through this wisdom that's presented to us. And we are going to be anchored in our lives because of this. So it's going to goad us along in the right direction, and it's going to also anchor us down in a way to give us that groundedness in life, to make sure that we're not swept along by kind of every other teaching that's presented out there. This book is meant to be challenging to us. This challenge is going to prod us to make us make wise choices, and they may be hard to carry out at times. So it's going to be challenging in that way. And with this wisdom, we're going to be anchored and stable with the wisdom that God provides through these inspired writings. If you go to Ecclesiastes 1 and verse 3, go back to the beginning of the book. We're going to see a question that's raised. And again, this is the question that's going to be answered in the book of Ecclesiastes. As we go through the series, we're going to answer this question. Or at least he will answer the question, and we're going to see what he writes about that. So Ecclesiastes 1 and verse 3. What do people gain from all their labors at which they toil under the sun? So isn't that another way of kind of saying what is the meaning of life, in a sense? What do people gain from all their labors at which they toil under the sun? All the things that we do on this earth, the things that we carry on doing, our jobs, in our lives, the things that we do in our lives. What do we gain from these things? What is the meaning of all of these things? And that's the question that the teacher or the preacher, Solomon, the writer of Ecclesiastes, is seeking to answer. He's trying to find the answer to this. Is there any value or profit from the things that we do on this earth? If our labor is meaningless as far as this earth is concerned, what can we do? What's the answer of what we should be doing? So that's what's going to be answered as we go through the book of Ecclesiastes. The writer is going to share what he learned from his personal experience. Again, we see that he gained all of these things while he was on this earth that we would consider success even in our world. He'll share from what he learned from his personal observations. And he'll share his counsel based on his wisdom and inspiration that God provided him as well. So again, very interesting book to see the experience that Solomon had and what he is going to tell us based on that experience. Solomon begins to answer his own question in the next verse, which is what we're going to look at next week. And he's going to answer those questions that many people have. Questions like, who am I? Where did I come from? Why am I here? What should I be doing? These things are all discussed in the book of Ecclesiastes. We're going to look at these questions, and it's worthy of our study. It's one of those books that we really should be looking at, and we are going to look at, to see how we can apply this wisdom on our life, again, so it can goad us in our thinking. It can challenge us and kind of prod us the way we should go so we can have that anchored life that's based on the scriptures and based on the things that God has taught us. So I'd like to offer an invitation. If you've not yet accepted Jesus on as your Lord, we can show you again in the scriptures how to do that. The scriptures tell us simply how we can accept this gift that God has offered to everybody on this earth. Please make your needs known and we can share that with you. And if you're a Christian who's struggling in any way, again, please make your needs known and we'll help in any way that we can.